We live in an era where the once rigid boundaries between mind and matter are dissolving, giving rise to a vision of reality that is surprisingly malleable. For centuries, we found comfort in the notion that the universe was governed by fixed laws operating independently of our awareness, a grand mechanism playing out with impartial precision. This assumption took root in the heyday of Newtonian physics, which presented a cosmos of separate objects obeying calculable forces. In such a setting, consciousness was relegated to a mere bystander, unconnected to the intricate dance of matter and energy. Yet as the 20th century dawned, scientists venturing into the realm of the very small discovered phenomena that shattered the certainty of that model. Quantum theory arose not just as a refinement of physics, but as a profound challenge to the bedrock idea that our internal states have no bearing on the external world. Researchers began to glimpse a truth once taught only in arcane mystical schools. Our observation seems to participate in shaping the very phenomena we study. In the early days of quantum experimentation, physicists were startled to find that particles like electrons could behave as localized points in one experiment, yet spread out like waves in another. It wasn't just that these entities had dual natures. More radical was the indication that whether they manifested as particles or waves depended on the act of measurement itself, on whether someone or something was looking. This observer effect, though still open to varied interpretations, unsettled the long-standing premise that the universe existed in a definite state, regardless of human observation. Suddenly, it appeared that the observer's involvement was integral to the outcome. All at once, a door to deeper questions was flung open. If, at the quantum scale, our choices and attention help determine what actually happens, what might that imply on the grander scales of daily life? In parallel, there existed a lineage of spiritual and esoteric traditions that had for centuries proclaimed the interdependence of mind and reality. Hermetic teachings, summarized in the phrase, "as above, so below," propose that one's inner conditions reverberate into the outward world. The principle suggested that fear or doubt might attract confirming experiences, just as love and possibility might unfold similarly confirming outcomes. But in a Newtonian age, such teachings were dismissed as superstition or wishful thinking. Yet once the quantum revolution revealed an unexpected unity between observer and observed at the subatomic level, the old Hermetic notions found renewed plausibility. Physicists themselves began to ask whether classical assumptions about an objective world out there could still hold, given that measurement seemed to collapse a haze of possibilities into a concrete reality. Though scientists struggled with the philosophical conundrums raised by the new physics, certain parallels with ancient wisdom stood out. Quantum mechanics showed us that electrons, and indeed all matter, could exist in superposed states until measured. Meanwhile, Hermetic texts had long warned that what the mind contemplates, it calls forth. For centuries, these texts were metaphorical or poetic, whereas quantum theory was couched in the language of mathematics and experiments. Yet at heart, both seemed to converge on a single, unsettling notion. We are not mere spectators in this cosmic theater. Our consciousness, our very act of noticing, might be central to the play unfolding before us. This crack in the wall between observer and observed invites fresh inquiry into areas once deemed purely mystical. Could it be that human belief, emotion, and will have a tangible impact on how events materialize? Although many physicists are quick to caution against stretching quantum results too far, others remain open to the idea that quantum insights might well inform our understanding of larger systems, including the human experience. And there is no shortage of anecdotal testimony from those who claim that by altering their inner attitudes, they have seen the outer landscape of their lives shift, often in ways that defy easy explanation. Such accounts can be disputed through the lens of coincidence or psychological bias. But for the open-minded, they reinforce the possibility that we inhabit a far more participatory universe than Newton's laws would have us believe. We might begin by acknowledging that Newton's legacy was invaluable in explaining the everyday world of tangible objects, from the falling apple to the orbit of the moon. That framework made it appear that matter was fundamentally separate from mind, and that reliable laws governed all changes in nature, irrespective of anyone's viewpoint. This viewpoint seemed obvious because it worked so well for centuries in domains like engineering, astronomy, and mechanics, and it still works. Airplanes fly, bridges stand, rockets navigate space, all thanks to classical principles. Yet as experimental methods probed subatomic scales, phenomena emerged that no classical formula could cleanly address. The electron, once thought to be a simple particle, demonstrated wave-like behaviors. Experiments in which electrons passed through dual slits produced interference patterns that suggested they traveled as waves through both slits at once. Yet if measured at the slit, they appeared as point-like particles. More disconcerting was the realization that whether the electron chose to act as a wave or a particle seemed linked to whether an observation was being made. This link spurred varied interpretations. Some claimed it was purely a matter of how instruments disturbed the system. Others hinted that consciousness itself might be essential in resolving the wave function, the mathematical object describing all potential outcomes. The debate quickly spiraled into metaphysical territory, prompting questions about free will, the nature of time, and whether parallel universes might exist. Those who favored the many worlds approach argued that all outcomes unfold, branching reality into countless parallel streams. Our consciousness merely perceives one branch. Others insisted that wave function collapse is a real event triggered by observation in some way. Regardless of which interpretation one leans toward, the old idea of a strictly objective universe persisted in diminishing form. Even the more conservative voices in physics agreed that the observer's presence could not be safely disregarded. In the midst of these debates, many recalled that Hermetic lore had always taught that mind is fundamental. As above, so below implied that an individual's thoughts or higher plane energies shape their physical environment. For most of modern history, such statements were written off by scientists as poetic fancy. But now they seemed curiously relevant, if only as an analogy. Quantum experiments consistently showed that the act of measurement altered the system, suggesting some interplay between mind and matter. Although one might not literally equate quantum mechanics with Hermetic magic, parallels in their core messages created a fertile ground for exploration. Scholars and mystics alike rediscovered ancient texts that insisted the outer world was a mirror, reflecting the mind's dominant beliefs and expectations. This mirror concept soon wove its way into popular self-help philosophies. People began to speak of manifestation, or the law of attraction, claiming that we draw into our experience the events that match our predominant mental states. From a purely psychological perspective, it could be explained as selective attention and self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe you are unlucky, you tend to notice misfortunes and disregard small blessings, thus reinforcing your belief. But those who invoked quantum theory and Hermetic ideals suggested a deeper mechanism where consciousness might affect the probabilities that shape everyday life. In effect, they posited that an ongoing observer effect could be unfolding at larger scales, though hidden by the complexity of multiple interactions. This viewpoint implies an extraordinary responsibility. If our inner states truly shape outward conditions, then negativity, fear, and self-defeating beliefs might constantly invite or align with unfavorable outcomes. Conversely, cultivating a sense of abundance, compassion, or gratitude could harmonize with an external reality echoing those higher vibrations. It's a heady notion, easily oversimplified into just think positive and everything will be perfect. Real change typically demands sustained emotional conviction, a willingness to rewire long-standing patterns, and the acceptance that everyone else also projects their consciousness into the shared environment. Hence, events often reflect a collective interplay, not just individual intention. Time itself, once believed to flow in a linear manner, also comes under scrutiny in these discussions. Einstein's relativity had already demonstrated that time can stretch or contract depending on relative velocity. More speculative ideas describe a block universe in which past, present, and future all coexist in a higher dimensional sense. That would mean the future is not something that doesn't exist yet. It's more like a region of the larger continuum that we have not traversed. Spiritual teachings often add that our beliefs and emotions serve as the means by which we choose which segment of this block universe we experience next. This radical reimagining of time suggests that we aren't merely drifting through a predetermined story, but maybe selecting from a tapestry of possible stories through our states of being. While quantum theory illuminates the concept of potentialities, the question remains, how does any of this translate to everyday events like relationships, careers, health, or serendipitous encounters? Some argue that our psychological makeup, our self-image, and habitual emotional climate defines what channel of reality we tune into. Much like a radio picks up a specific station based on its frequency, our inner states might lock onto events consistent with that frequency. A person who perpetually feels victimized unconsciously aligns with scenarios that confirm that outlook. Another, who cultivates confidence and gratitude, might flow into more supportive and uplifting circumstances. Psychologists might explain this in purely behavioral or perceptual terms. If you expect negativity, you unwittingly find it or overlook positive clues, and thus remain stuck in your assumption. But quantum or Hermetic devotees posit that there's more at work than mere psychology. They propose that consciousness is tapping into the deep structure of reality, rearranging probabilities in subtle ways that eventually scale up to tangible experiences. Laboratory experiments confirm that measuring quantum particles alters outcomes. While it's tricky to apply these results to large-scale phenomena, proponents of mind-reality linkage see a continuum. For them, life itself is an ongoing measurement, a perpetual act of observing, labeling, and emotionally encoding events. If at the subatomic scale, an observer influences what becomes real, Might the same dynamic apply, in aggregated form, to everyday occurrences? Such a leap remains controversial among many physicists, yet it resonates powerfully in metaphysical circles and in the personal testimonies of those who claim to have shifted their realities through mental focus. Hermetic philosophy frequently describes the external world as a mirror reflecting one's inner state. This metaphor is compelling. If fear is your constant slide, your outer scenarios mirror fear. If love and creativity guide your lens, your outer world eventually projects those qualities. It's not typically instantaneous. Physical life operates with inertia and momentum, and any new pattern takes time to emerge visibly. Yet the principle remains. Persistently holding a particular emotional mental stance guides the cosmic mirror to reflect it back. Critics question whether this is simply confirmation bias, where people see what they want to see. Proponents counter that while bias might play a role, the synchronicities and changes in external conditions that follow a deep shift in mindset often exceed mere coincidence. They also argue that quantum mechanics itself suggests a participatory cosmos, thus supporting the mirror analogy in more than a symbolic way. If we entertain the thought that consciousness influences events, a thorny question arises. Are we personally responsible for every setback we face? Such an extreme stance could imply we manifest illnesses or accidents solely through flawed thinking. Hermetic and quantum spiritual teachings respond with nuance. They acknowledge that humans live in a collectively shaped world, with billions of minds each broadcasting their own fears, desires, and beliefs. Catastrophes may reflect group-level energies or karmic entanglements. Still, each individual can refine their own experience by adjusting their focus. While we cannot always prevent large-scale events, we can alter how they affect us and what alternatives open up as we move forward. The moral dimension emerges. If we indeed help shape reality, then negativity or blame is not merely personal baggage. It's also a signal we're sending to the larger field. Conversely, cultivating love, empathy, and creativity contributes not only to our private benefit, but to the shared matrix in which we all participate. This can lead to a compassionate outlook. When we see someone repeatedly facing hardships, we might offer understanding or tools for shifting internal states, rather than coldly asserting they manifested their suffering. Many spiritual lineages mention glimpses of potential futures, or what some call time loops, moments when we see events that haven't yet solidified in physical reality. Hermetic lore suggests that by altering one's mindset, such futures can be embraced or avoided. Quantum theory, with its multiple interpretations of time, doesn't outright negate the possibility that future conditions can exist in a sort of potential form, accessible to consciousness under certain circumstances. Modern teachers like Dr. Joe Dispenza and Neville Goddard emphasize the practice of feeling the wish fulfilled by conjuring an internal state through vivid imagination and genuine emotion that mirrors the state one desires in external reality. We effectively command the subconscious or the quantum field to deliver matching outcomes. Skeptics note that fleeting daydreams rarely produce tangible results, but heartfelt conviction can move mountains. The key is coherence between belief and emotion, sustained over enough time that the external reflection has a chance to appear. As we proceed, it's helpful to remember that conscious intention may need time to manifest. Just as seeds require soil and nurturing before sprouting, Our mental states often follow a gestation period before visible changes occur. During that interim, we might see subtle bridge events hinting that our desired outcome is forming. These coincidences can reassure us that we're on track. However, the temptation is to revert to old doubts if immediate results don't appear, which can undermine the alignment before it fully takes root. Critics often dismiss these notions as magical thinking, or they point to random chance as a more plausible explanation. Yet even some scientists admit that quantum mechanics undermines the old separation between subject and object. Physical laws still operate, but they might be incomplete if they fail to account for consciousness's role. While definitive proof that consciousness steers everyday events is elusive, numerous individuals claim that adopting these ideas changes their lives, producing uncanny synchronicities and personal transformations that defy purely material explanations. In broad perspective, we might be co-creating our shared world as well. Large-scale events, wars, social movements, economic booms or busts, could reflect collective attitudes and beliefs woven across countless human minds. Hermetic thought implies that real societal shifts begin with internal realignments. Enough people focusing on compassion and collaborative possibility might gradually tip the global balance away from conflict. While that might seem idealistic, it resonates with the underlying premise that reality is not fixed and that consciousness influences outcomes. Some wonder exactly how the universe reorders itself in response to shifts in one individual's mental state. Explanations vary, from psychological changes in perception and behavior to speculative quantum resonance effects scaled up by entanglement or wave function collapse. Regardless of the mechanism, the real-world impact can be noticeable. Teachers like Dr. Dispenza speak of training the mind and body to feel the elevated emotions of a desired future, effectively conditioning the brain to that outcome. Neville Goddard taught that imagination, when paired with the feeling of fulfillment, eventually externalizes in daily life. Whether one interprets it as neurological reprogramming or an interaction with the quantum field, the shift in perspective often correlates with shifts in tangible conditions. Life thus appears less like a static machine and more like a fluid, participatory domain. We each hold a brush, painting our personal narratives onto a shared canvas. We see coincidences, chance encounters, fortuitous alignments of events take on new significance in a worldview that allows for mind-matter interplay. And while we shouldn't treat these possibilities as a guarantee of effortless wish fulfillment, they at least suggest that daily existence is more malleable than classical assumptions once dictated. Such a worldview can reinvigorate the sense of wonder many of us lose in adulthood. Like children, discovering that their gestures evoke responses in the world around them, we awaken to the possibility that our mental gestures, belief, focus, intention, might evoke subtle but real changes in what we experience. This is not to deny adversity. Indeed, challenges remain part of life, but they can be reinterpreted as invitations to refine our inner stance. The old reflex of victimhood gives way to the notion that we can pivot internally, generating solutions or attracting unexpected forms of assistance. Disciplined practice is key. The results tend to be muddled if we sporadically dabble in positive thinking, but remain mired in contradictions the rest of the time. Ancient Hermetic texts advise ongoing vigilance over one's mental climate. Modern self-development literature echoes this, urging consistent visualization, emotional rehearsal, and mindfulness. Such practices train the mind to stabilize in a chosen state rather than oscillating back to ingrained anxieties. We live not in a vacuum, but in an interconnected world of countless other minds. While personal reality can shift relatively quickly, collective changes may come more gradually as the entangled streams of consciousness converge or clash. Yet each person's transformation can influence those around them. The mirror principle suggests that when one individual radiates a consistent, uplifting state, it can ripple outward, offering others a new reference point or an opportunity to question their own limiting beliefs. Mystical teachings sometimes compare this to shining a projector light through a series of filters. If fear is the filter, we project fearful scenarios onto the screen of life. If love is the filter, more harmonious experiences appear. Reality, then, might be akin to a cosmic dream we all share, with each participant shaping their corner through the mental slides they insert. This notion feels intangible from a materialist standpoint, yet quantum discoveries about superpositions, observer effects, and entangled networks hint at the potential validity of such metaphors. We also face the question, if consciousness shapes experience, how do we account for tragedy and injustice that afflict seemingly innocent people? Hermetic thought points to complex networks of collective consciousness, old karmic threads, and the freedom of billions of beings all weaving outcomes. Not every event is your personal doing. Even so, we can choose how to respond, thereby redefining our path within larger constraints. The same principle that fosters personal growth can, when practiced widely, sow the seeds of larger redemption. It might not cure every ill overnight, but it nudges the communal field toward more constructive expressions. One frequent insight is that focusing on lack or limitation can perpetuate those states. Yet shifting to an inner stance of abundance doesn't mean reckless behavior. It means genuinely feeling enoughness, trusting that solutions exist, and thus moving through life with less anxiety and more openness. People who make this shift often notice small changes first, maybe an unexpected check in the mail, or a helpful introduction from a friend. As these accumulations grow, the sense of supportive flow expands. Whether we chalk it up to quantum alignment or confirmation bias, the subjective impact remains powerful. Life seems more cooperative, more alive. The flip side is that no matter how ardently we hold a vision, it may not manifest if our subconscious pulls in a different direction. Internal conflicts, hidden self-doubts, or long-standing trauma can interfere, producing contradictory signals. That's why many traditions stress the importance of addressing the shadow self, those neglected parts of our psyche that sabotage overt intentions. Emotional clearing, forgiveness work, therapy, or meditative discipline may be essential to refine the broadcast we're sending into reality. It's also crucial not to neglect action in the physical domain. While the mind may open doors or alert us to opportunities, effort still matters. Hermetic wisdom never implied idleness. Instead, it taught that mental alignment should inform practical steps so that the invisible and the visible, the energetic and the concrete work in tandem. Quantum-based self-help philosophies echo that approach. Once you align internally, you naturally feel inspired to take certain actions, and those actions become more effective because they harmonize with the new state of being. In exploring these ideas, we glimpse how quantum revelations dovetail with age-old spiritual concepts. Both point to an intimate dance between observer and observed, inner world and outer events. The difference is that what was once purely esoteric can now be discussed alongside subatomic experiments and theoretical physics. That doesn't mean science has definitively proven mystical assertions, but it does mean the old walls of skepticism have been cracked, allowing more integrated perspectives to flourish. In short, we seem to dwell in a reality that is far from static, one which responds, at least to some extent, to our inward orientation. This has profound implications for how we approach challenges, opportunities, and even our sense of self. If the observer truly matters in the quantum realm, perhaps it also matters in the realm of everyday existence. If Hermetic texts were correct that mental and spiritual planes influence the material, then each of us is more potent than we realize, both for personal fulfillment and for contributing to collective well-being. Far from guaranteeing an instantaneous fix for life's dilemmas, these insights nonetheless usher in a renewed sense of wonder and responsibility, reminding us that we hold a creative brush in painting the canvas of our lived reality. Perhaps the most striking realization that emerges once we begin to suspect consciousness plays a participatory role in reality is that every thought, every emotion, and every subtle impression could carry some creative weight. At first, this sounds exhilarating, as though we wield near magical powers to reshape the world simply by adjusting our beliefs. Then comes the sobering reflection. If so much is truly influenced by how we perceive and feel, how many of our personal struggles, and indeed, how many broader social conditions, arise from deeply ingrained collective assumptions that have gone unexamined for ages? Stepping into this paradigm means owning not just the promise of transformation, but also the responsibility that comes with it. The second we accept that our inner landscape might matter in shaping outer events, we can no longer play the role of passive victim without feeling at least a hint of contradiction. In continuing from earlier reflections, we see that the question of precisely how consciousness intertwines with quantum phenomena remains a major point of contention among physicists and philosophers alike. Some propose that the observer's effect is more about the physical disturbance caused by measuring devices than about conscious awareness per se. Others maintain that mind itself is intrinsic to the very process by which wave function potentials become tangible realities. In all cases, however, the old belief in a strictly objective external world fades. The act of observation, be it from an instrument or a conscious mind, seems to factor into the final outcome, challenging the notion that objects exist fully formed out there, regardless of who is looking. Even if the exact mechanics are unclear, we emerge with a sense that the boundary between the internal realm of thoughts and the external realm of matter is surprisingly permeable. One might then ask, if observation plays a creative role in subatomic events, can the same principle, when scaled up, help explain certain puzzling aspects of daily life that conventional science dismisses or labels as coincidence? For instance, many people speak of synchronicities, those uncanny alignments of events that feel too purposeful to be mere accidents. Others recount stories where a sustained change in self-concept led to dramatic alterations in their career trajectory or relationships, often through small, seemingly random steps that, in hindsight, perfectly connected. The mechanistic model struggles to account for such stories without resorting to chance or selective memory. But a worldview that embraces the participatory nature of observation opens a door to a subtler explanation. That consciousness, through persistent focus, might serve as a navigational beacon in a vast sea of potentials, gently drawing toward us the experiences we expect or emotionally saturate. Yet these ideas demand nuance, lest we oversimplify and conclude that all suffering arises from wrong thinking. The tapestry of life is woven from innumerable threads, individual beliefs and emotions, yes, but also family dynamics, cultural norms, global institutions, and deep historical currents that shape our collective psyche. No single thread can single-handedly unravel or reweave the entire cloth. Even so, acknowledging that each thread matters, that each person's stance resonates into the collective, can free us from defeatist views. We might not single-handedly transform the entire global picture, but we can move our personal sphere in a constructive direction, often with ripple effects reaching beyond our immediate circle. Thus, each individual shift contributes something to the collective potential. People who delve deeply into Hermetic or quantum-inspired teachings frequently report that real change usually manifests through a series of bridge-of-incident events. They describe how, after adopting a more confident or open-hearted mindset, they encounter a chance meeting, discover an overlooked opportunity, or receive helpful support from unexpected quarters. From an outside perspective, it might appear random, but from within the new worldview, it feels like a synchronized movement of forces responding to the newly projected frequency. Such experiences can be so vivid and repeated that they erode skepticism. Over time, even those who originally doubted the idea that consciousness influences reality may come to sense that life indeed mirrors our inner states in ways the old mechanistic model never quite explained. In the context of day-to-day living, embracing this participatory perspective leads to a reevaluation of habits, thoughts, and emotional patterns that once seemed inconsequential. If focusing on problems amplifies them, perhaps it becomes wiser to focus on solutions. If living in a mindset of scarcity tends to block opportunities, then practicing gratitude might open channels of unexpected abundance. Yet the shift is not about blind positivity or pretending difficulties don't exist. It's more subtle, acknowledging what is, yet choosing to dwell on constructive possibilities rather than fueling perpetual worry. Hermetic teachings often call this mental transmutation, wherein you notice an undesirable vibration within you, fear, anger, resignation, and intentionally transmute it into a higher, more life-affirming state. This can feel like an internal alchemy, a process of refining raw emotional lead into the gold of insight and empowerment. We recall that the quantum revolution was not merely a set of new equations, but a dismantling of our trust in a purely deterministic universe. Prior to its emergence, it was easy to assume reality was entirely independent of observers, that material processes followed strict causal chains, unmindful of human presence. Quantum theory shattered this certainty. It introduced probability waves, superpositions of multiple states, and the baffling phenomenon known as entanglement, in which two particles remain correlated no matter the spatial separation. While many treat these as mere curiosities of the microscopic world, others sense they hint at a deeper reality, one in which separation is ultimately illusory, and everything, in some sense, remains connected. These scientific revelations dovetail with the Hermetic dictum that the all is mind, suggesting that what we perceive as fragmented matter might be expressions of a unified mental or informational substrate. From a personal growth standpoint, This notion of unity can foster a compassionate lens. If our inner states truly co-create the external events we encounter, then how we treat ourselves internally might ripple out to affect others as well. When we cultivate acceptance and kindness in our thoughts, we might not just be shifting our own experiences, we might be subtly influencing the collective field. Granted, this sounds grandiose, and skeptics will be quick to demand experimental proof. Yet many who practice mindfulness or heart-centered meditations report that their relationships improve, conflicts ease, and serendipitous meetings become more frequent. Whether by subtle psychological cues or by genuine quantum entanglement, the effect in lived experience can be strikingly real. This perspective also refines how we approach adversity. Rather than seeing hurdles as random misfortunes, we can interpret them as signals or prompts that reveal where our consciousness needs adjustment. When a repeated pattern of disappointment surfaces, we can investigate which underlying beliefs or habitual emotions might be reinforcing that outcome. It's not about blaming oneself. It's about using outer events as mirrors reflecting inner dynamics. The challenge is that such an approach requires humility and willingness to probe aspects of ourselves we'd rather ignore. Yet, time and again, stories emerge of people who bravely examined their internal narratives. Fear of unworthiness, mistrust of success, hidden resentments, and found that once they rewrote those narratives, external circumstances began to shift in surprising harmony. An intriguing extension of this worldview concerns the nature of time. If all moments exist in a higher dimension, like pages in a cosmic manuscript, then the future is already laid out in various potential forms. We might not be forging something from nothing, but rather selecting which page or chapter we read next. This idea resonates with accounts of precognitive dreams, intuitive flashes about future events, or the sense of déjà vu some experience in pivotal moments. If the quantum realm permits superpositions of states, perhaps our consciousness navigates among timelines, each timeline corresponding to a particular arrangement of outcomes that match a certain frequency or vibration of mind. Of course, mainstream physics rarely describes it in quite these terms, but the concept remains compelling for those who blend scientific openness with metaphysical speculation. In practical terms, adopting a timeline perspective can alter how we make daily choices. Instead of feeling bound by a linear chain of cause and effect, we might act in ways that reflect the reality we wish to occupy. If we desire healthier relationships, yet have historically believed ourselves unlovable, we might start living as though love and support are already part of our experience. This might mean behaving more kindly toward ourselves, stepping out of defensive postures, or engaging with others from a place of genuine openness rather than fear. Over time, these subtle internal and behavioral adjustments can magnetize experiences that confirm the new self-view. From the old standpoint, it might look like mere psychological reconditioning, but from the quantum Hermetic vantage, we are quite literally sliding into a timeline consistent with our updated identity. Another dimension is the collective environment. Even if one individual embraces a high-frequency state, they still move within a broader social context that might be dominated by negativity or conflict. Yet this does not invalidate their personal shift. Historically, we see instances where a single individual's clarity of purpose influenced entire communities, spiritual figures, innovators, activists, who seem to operate on a more elevated plane of conviction. and thus drew countless others into their vision. While the majority might remain in a default outlook, those living from an elevated consciousness can spark changes that ripple through cultural or institutional structures. It might not be immediate or universal, but it can be undeniably powerful. This again aligns with the Hermetic notion that a single strong vibration can transmute or uplift surrounding vibrations, though the effect depends on many variables. For those seeking to integrate these insights into daily routines, a few consistent practices are often mentioned, despite varying terminology or philosophical framing. One is intentional imagination. By regularly spending time conjuring a scene in which a desired reality is already actual, feeling the emotions, sensory details, and gratitude, we give the subconscious a blueprint. In quantum-friendly language, we collapse that potential into a more likely outcome through our consistent focus. Another practice is quiet self-observation, in which we track moment-to-moment thoughts and emotions, gently redirecting them if they fall into old, limiting patterns. Rather than forcing positivity, we learn to cultivate states of acceptance, curiosity, and constructive expectation. A third component is emotional congruence. Statements like, "I am abundant," mean little if we simultaneously harbor deep fear of lack. So, the real work becomes aligning the emotional body with the chosen affirmations, gradually dissolving internal contradictions. Sustaining these practices typically reveals hidden layers. Someone might repeatedly affirm prosperity, yet realize they harbor guilt around money or success. That guilt acts like a counter-signal, muddying the frequency they're broadcasting. Thus, deeper introspection or therapeutic work might be needed to unearth and release old wounds. In the Hermetic tradition, this is analogous to purifying one's mental energy so it can shape matter without interference. In quantum parlance, it's akin to removing noise from the signal, so the intended outcome can stand out against random fluctuations. Both analogies convey the same principle. A stable, coherent mind state consistently shapes events more effectively than a mind riddled with doubts or inner conflicts. Experiences of manifestation are rarely instantaneous. They often follow what some call a gestation period, a span of time in which subtle adjustments occur in both the person's psyche and external circumstances. During this period, synchronicities may appear as gentle nudges, meeting someone who shares vital information, stumbling across an article that addresses a long-standing question, noticing a pattern that clarifies an important decision. These bridging incidents feel like confirmation that the new reality is congealing. From a skeptic's standpoint, such occurrences might be explained by heightened awareness or plain coincidence. Yet those who have lived through multiple such chains of events come to see them as part of a larger orchestration, one that aligns elegantly with their focused intention. A crucial caveat arises when discussing tragedies or systemic injustices. If consciousness shapes reality, it's natural to ask why cruel and devastating events still abound. Hermetic teachings interpret collective catastrophes as a result of accumulated negative thought forms, unresolved traumas, and the interplay of countless individual vibrations, some of which are steeped in fear or hostility. Quantum theory doesn't typically venture into moral or social territory, but the notion of entangled systems might at least hint that the mindset of the many can produce emergent outcomes not directly willed by any single participant. In other words, while each individual wields creative power, We operate within a communal field, and the resonance of billions of minds can yield large-scale turmoil. This perspective also suggests that if enough people alter their internal state toward unity and cooperation, the broader reality can shift in that direction as well. Though how rapidly this might occur is open to speculation. Illusions of personal omnipotence can arise when first embracing these ideas, leading some to dismiss physical constraints, societal structures, or the necessity of consistent effort. One might erroneously believe that mere positive thinking negates the need to address concrete challenges. Over time, though, the more balanced practitioners learn that external action and internal alignment are complementary. Just as Hermetic tradition spoke of the mental plane influencing the physical, so too do we need practical steps to implement the changes we envision. Imagining prosperity, for instance, can open the door to a new job opportunity, but applying for the position and honing relevant skills remain essential in bridging the inner blueprint with tangible reality. As more individuals explore these concepts, a subtle cultural shift seems underway. Even mainstream fields like psychology, medicine, and business management increasingly acknowledge the role of mindset and emotional intelligence in shaping outcomes. The placebo effect, once considered an annoyance in clinical trials, is now studied as a phenomenon that reveals the power of belief in healing. Companies invest in training that fosters positive mental culture among employees, noting improvements in productivity and innovation. While these shifts don't always invoke quantum theory directly, they reflect an emerging consensus that consciousness isn't merely a passive recorder of events. Instead, it can be a catalyst that alters performance, well-being, and the range of possible outcomes. In spiritual circles, emphasis often falls on deepening one's empathy and compassion, recognizing that the same principle that allows us to shape personal reality applies to how we treat others. If every being is a node in a vast field of consciousness, then harboring hatred or harsh judgment might contribute to the negativity swirling in the collective. Likewise, extending kindness or silent blessings could help elevate the overall resonance. Such thoughts echo in the practices of prayer circles and global meditations, where groups gather to hold a shared vision of peace or healing. Reports of lowered crime rates, improved social cohesion, or more harmonious weather patterns during these synchronized efforts, while contested, intrigue those who see a participatory universe in action. One might wonder how to discern genuine shifts in reality from sheer psychological reinterpretation. If we adopt a more positive mindset, perhaps we're simply noticing the good that was always there, or attributing meaning to random coincidences. That's the perennial debate between subjective experience and objective verification. Yet even hardened skeptics can encounter scenarios where the intricacy of coincidences strains the chance explanation. Those who keep a meticulous journal of intentions, emotional states, and subsequent random occurrences often observe patterns that challenge the assumption of happenstance. This doesn't constitute laboratory proof, but it can be profoundly convincing on a personal level. Further, the interplay of quantum ideas and Hermetic principles naturally leads us to question the nature of identity itself. If consciousness is fundamental, if each individual mind is part of a larger mind, then where do we draw the line between me and the universe? Some spiritual teachers suggest that personal existence is like a wave in an ocean of consciousness, seemingly separate on the surface, but intimately connected at the depths. From this vantage, the reason we can influence reality might be that we are not truly isolated observers, but localized expressions of a universal creative intelligence. The notion that we channel universal mind, rather than possessing a separate, sealed-off consciousness, resonates with the Hermetic statement that the all is mind. Many find that meditating on this unity perspective expands empathy and diffuses existential angst, providing a sense of belonging that transcends the usual boundaries of the ego. Still, challenges persist. Engaging in a creative or manifestation practice doesn't shield us from heartbreak, illness, or external crises. Difficulties can remain, but they take on a different hue when viewed through the lens that our internal stance matters. Instead of spiraling into helplessness, we ask, what is this moment teaching me? Which of my beliefs or vibrations does this situation reflect? How can I shift to a more aligned state and seek solutions? Over many such instances, the evidence for a participatory cosmos can accumulate, reinforcing faith in the interplay between inner state and outer manifestation. We might also wonder how these ideas could shape the future of education and leadership. If consciousness actively guides possibility, we could teach children to harness emotional regulation, visualization, and creative problem-solving from an early age. Leadership in business or politics might learn to harness group intention, ensuring that meetings or negotiations begin with a shared vision of constructive outcomes. Such an approach doesn't ignore tangible logistics. It enhances them with a recognition that fear-based mindsets narrow our field of solutions, while a collective sense of possibility expands it. Skeptics justifiably warn that focusing on consciousness could lead to self-absorption or a rejection of scientific rigor. They point out that quantum mechanics is precise for tiny particles, yet the leap to macroscopic reality is still under exploration. Responsible advocates do not dismiss conventional science or the need for evidence. Rather, they highlight that quantum findings poke holes in the notion of an observer-independent world. That leaves conceptual space for consciousness to be a factor. The real frontier lies in discerning how this factor might extend to everyday life, balancing disciplined observation with a willingness to question old assumptions. Those who adopt this participatory worldview often reach a stage of becoming conscious of being conscious. They realize their minds ran on autopilot for much of their lives, recycling inherited fears or assumptions. Now, they deliberately select what states of mind they wish to nourish. This shift can be revolutionary, dissolving old triggers and prompting new ways of responding. Over time, a quiet confidence grows, not from any dogma, but from repeated experiences that link inner shifts to outer changes. Hermetic texts might call this alchemy of the soul, transforming base reactions into refined expressions capable of shaping matter. Morally, it underscores the idea that negative judgments, hostile attitudes, and enduring resentments do more than sour one's immediate mood. They might also reinforce unproductive dynamics in the shared field. Conversely, deliberate kindness and empathy might contribute to a more harmonious collective resonance. These impulses echo long-standing spiritual precepts about forgiveness and compassion, yet recontextualize them in a framework that considers the real energetic or quantum-level influence of conscious intent. To many, this aligns with religious teachings on prayer and devotion, repackaged in modern terminology. If the quantum wave function describes potential, and if mind helps collapse that potential, then prayer or focused intention is not necessarily an appeal to a distant deity, but rather an act of synchronization with the underlying pattern of reality. The difference is that where religion once invoked dogma, quantum Hermetic thinking draws on direct experience and theoretical support from physics. Of course, it remains an evolving conversation, open-ended and subject to ongoing debate. Critics note that real-world problems like disease, inequality, or ecological crisis won't be solved by thoughts alone. Proponents agree, asserting that consciousness-based approaches must work in tandem with informed, compassionate action. Hermetic ideals never denied the physical plane. They insisted that higher, mental planes undergird it. Thus, moral choices, social structures, and communal efforts remain vital. The difference is that these outward initiatives can be guided by an inner coherence that might make them more impactful and less entangled in fear. From moment to moment, we choose our focus. We interpret events. We either nurture or diminish possibilities through our mental and emotional stances. Under the old mechanical model, these micro-choices seemed negligible in a cosmos driven by external forces. Under the quantum Hermetic lens, each choice nudges probabilities, accumulating into a momentum that shapes tomorrow's landscape. Over the long run, that momentum can carry us to vastly different personal or collective outcomes than we once believed possible. A recurring tension arises between acceptance of the present and the desire to create anew. Many teachings stress that genuine creation only flourishes in a stance of acceptance. Resisting or denying the now can trap us in lower vibrations. By contrast, fully acknowledging the present reality while remaining open to a better future allows us to channel the constructive energy that fosters real change. Hermetic texts often allude to this dynamic, suggesting that the alchemist first observes what is, then skillfully applies mental transmutation. Over time, those who internalize these insights report an expanding sense of wonder. Coincidences that once seemed random become part of a larger conversation between the individual and the cosmos. Life is still filled with challenges, but these challenges are met with a recognition that the mind's vantage can shift how solutions unfold. The extraordinary quietly mingles with the ordinary, making daily routines feel more purposeful and alive. All of this culminates in a vision of a future where humanity integrates pragmatic knowledge with the realization that consciousness counts. Emerging technologies might measure or channel collective intentions. Education could include emotional mastery. Healthcare might systematically embrace the mind-body connection. And governance might lean toward collaboration rather than zero-sum rivalries. Such scenarios sound ambitious, but even partial adoption could mark a significant evolution from the purely mechanistic stance that once defined our civilization. Crucially, this doesn't entail discarding rational analysis. Rather, it expands our framework to accommodate consciousness as a fundamental variable. The scientific spirit, rooted in observation and experimentation, remains valuable. Quantum mechanics itself was born of bold hypotheses tested by precise measurements. Now, the interplay of mind and reality beckons us to test, observe correlations, and refine our perspectives in the living laboratory of our own experiences. If we find that consistent emotional focus correlates with notable shifts in circumstances, then for us, that data becomes compelling. Personal stories often affirm that once someone grasps this principle, life feels richer and more workable. They see themselves not as pawns of fate, but as participants in a vast cosmic dance. Adversities become catalysts for introspection, as they try to discern which beliefs or habits might have shaped those difficulties. Over time, a sense of partnership with the universe emerges, one where intentions and coincidences intermingle in a pattern that defies the notion of mere randomness. Some remain unconvinced, attributing every apparent miracle to chance or wishful interpretation. Others see the mounting evidence, subjective as it may be, as a testament to a deeper reality. Across the board, the conversation intensifies. If quantum experiments show that objectivity isn't as absolute as once thought, maybe all domains of life, love, health, politics, creativity, are likewise open to conscious input. The result is a blossoming sense that the cosmos might be alive with possibilities waiting to be invited into form. For those who embrace this perspective, each day becomes an invitation to align thought and emotion with the outcomes they yearn to see, not merely for personal gain, but also for collective upliftment. It is, in many respects, a path of mastery that requires humility and diligence. The illusions of immediate gratification can lead to frustration if results do not appear swiftly. But those who persevere often discover that the quantum Hermetic worldview yields incremental but unmistakable transformations. As the conversation evolves, we see a convergence between modern science and ancient mysticism, each reinforcing the other's intimation that consciousness is an intrinsic player in how reality unfolds. The suspicion that mind and matter interpenetrate now stands on firmer ground, no longer relegated solely to esoteric circles. Even if mainstream consensus is slow to adopt a full-fledged participatory model of reality, the seeds of that shift have been planted. People from diverse walks of life, scientists, entrepreneurs, artists, spiritual leaders, are conducting their own informal experiments, documenting how changing one's inner atmosphere appears to shape the events in one's external world. Ultimately, the real journey is personal and communal at once. Each of us can experiment by adopting a chosen inner state: confidence, gratitude, generosity, and seeing how the outer reflections morph over time. We can watch for synchronicities, notice shifts in relationships, and track whether opportunities once hidden come into view. Skepticism can remain a healthy companion, ensuring we do not slip into gullibility. But a certain willingness to suspend disbelief, coupled with earnest practice, can unveil layers of reality that the old mechanistic story missed. And in discovering these layers, we might find a renewed sense of agency and reverence for the tapestry of existence, woven as it is with threads of both matter and mind, logic and mystery, self and the larger field of life.